My goodness. If that is not the story, the headline from this past weekend for Indiana football, I don't really know what it is. Welcome into This Week in Indiana football, also according to Indiana themselves, coming out of the tunnel. I can't remember which player it was specifically, didn't have the correct spelling on their jersey. So anyway, welcome to This Week in Indiana football, episode 5, an Iowa recap episode. Brought to you by Indiana Sports Beat Radio. As always, be sure to listen to Jim Coyle every Monday through Friday on WREF in Evansville, WBRO in Marengo, and 9 to 11 on YouTube live every morning. And joining me, as always, Dustin Schutte from Saturday Tradition. How you doing, Dustin?
Well, I'm doing a lot better than Indiana is probably doing right about now. Although I will say that I give Tom Allen some credit based on what he did at his press conference on Monday to take off his hat and read and make sure that it said Indiana instead of Indinia. I thought that was pretty clever, willing to poke fun of the mistake on the uniform. I thought that was pretty funny. So, it was an overall bad day, but it just kind of shows that, you got to move on. It's a long season and you can't, you and I can dwell on what happened and we can talk about it, which is what we're going to do today. But it's a good sign that he's not dwelling on it. And it doesn't seem like the team is right now either.
And I feel like, and when it comes to outcomes for this game that were talked about, it seemed like the one that ended up happening, Indiana getting blown out, is the one that, at least on the Indiana side of things, got talked about the least. And maybe that's just coming from the Indiana Sports Beat perspective in me. But it seemed like, I knew myself that there was a chance that Indiana could lay an egg, but I feel like deep down, and not just me, multiple Indiana fans, I would say multiple Indiana media outlets didn't think that Iowa was going to destroy Indiana.
No, I don't think anybody thought that either team was going to get destroyed. I think everybody thought this was going to be a hard-fought matchup that featured two really good defenses, and that just wasn't the case. Indiana's defense didn't play terrible. They didn't play great, but when you have two pick sixes, that really just swings the game. And we talked about, I said on multiple shows, whether it was on Indiana Sports Beat with Jim Coyle or whether it was on this podcast, I mentioned, Indiana can't rely on the pass. They can't just throw the ball 50 times and expect to beat Iowa. Iowa's secondary is too good. They're typically really good up front, and their linebacker play is never bad. So you couldn't expect to win that way. And then we had Jeffrey the Greek on from the Eyes on Big podcast. And
man, doesn't it just feel like he hit the nail on the head in every aspect? It almost makes me feel embarrassed to think that I had my own prediction.
Well, I know, and he wasn't even predicting a blowout one way or the other. He was basically saying that Indiana survived on big plays last season, and Iowa tends to not allow those kind of big plays, especially over the last 2 years. Phil Parker's had that defense clicking. And so what did you see? You saw Indiana go for big play balls, and occasionally it worked, not to the extent that they were able to get into the end zone, but they were able to break up some of those explosive plays. But by and large, Iowa was prepared for that type of offense, and it just did not play out. Like you said, the way he described that game and broke it down, it almost played out. It was eerie how much that played out the way he kind of predicted it.
And I think that's the craziest thing of all of the things that happened on Saturday, at least when you look at Iowa. They looked like they were already 6 or 7 games into the season on the defensive side of things. They were very sound. They didn't look like they were going to give up anything deep, and they didn't. And it's just I think it surprised the Indiana offense. Michael Penick, doesn't matter who it was. Nick Sheridan. I don't think Indiana as a whole was prepared for the preparation that Iowa had already done on defense to be as good as they were.
Well, and I thought more, once you get to a certain point in that game, I understand that Indiana's offense is built on big plays, but it also felt like Michael Penix and Nick Sheridan and that entire offense was trying, when they got down, what I don't remember exactly how the scoring played out, but once they got down by multiple scores in that game, it felt like they were trying to get it back on one play.
When it was in the first 2.5 minutes.
Yeah. You can't get all that back in one play. You got to try to wear down that Iowa defense. You got to try to nickel and dime them, and then if that's working for you, then that's when the big play might open up. But they were just never able to do it. It felt like they were trying to get 15 to 20 yards every time they went through the air, and that wasn't the case. And the other thing we talked about, John, was we expected this running game with Delon McCullough, now the running backs coach, and Stephen Carr in the backfield, and a deeper, more talented, more experienced offensive line. We expected maybe not Indiana to rush for 200 yards or something like that, but we expected it to be formidable.
Yeah.
Now,
here's the thing with the running game, I think. I do believe that had this game not started the way that it did, that Indiana had a game plan to get the running game going in a different way that it ended up being because they were down 14-0 in the first 2 to 3 minutes. I don't think that – I mean, obviously you don't anticipate throwing a pick six. You don't anticipate giving up a 40 or 50-yard run in the beginning of the game. And so they had to adjust to that. And I don't know what kind of adjustments that they had in mind for that scenario, but I'm going to assume it wasn't very many in mind off the top.
But, okay, so that speaks then – if you think that, then that speaks to a bigger problem. Because why – even if the game doesn't start out the way that you had thought, you have 50 minutes, you have 55 minutes left. Why would you completely abandon your game plan at that point? You say, okay, we gave up a big play. We gave up 2 big plays, basically. We gave up the 56-yard touchdown run to Tyler Goodson, and we gave up a pick six. Why are you scrapping your game plan? If you can get into halftime down a possession, I don't remember who received the opening kickoff or who got the ball at halftime, but if you're able to get out of that half down by 7 to 10 points, you've got a whole second half to try to mount some sort of comeback. So if they,
I'm not saying that they abandoned the entire playbook altogether or game plan, but I definitely think when you're on the road in the environment that it was, and we talked about this in the very first podcast, what's going to happen if Michael Penick throws an interception on his very first drive, and he did that, and the worst thing that could have come out of it came out of it. And I think the coaching staff was surprised at how rattled he was. I mean, I don't think there's a single soul, Iowa fan, Indiana fan, neutral, that even if Michael Penix threw an opening play pick or an opening drive pick, that he was going to stay that way the entire game. And so it's very hard to understand what might have been going through his mind as he made mistake after mistake after mistake, and he never found a rhythm throughout the rest of the game.
Well, like I said, I just think that from a mental standpoint, he felt like he needed to get it all back in one play. When you watch how that game went, there wasn't a lot of Indiana just hitting receivers for 6 or 7 yards. It felt like they were always trying to throw past the sticks, always trying to create a big play. And when you do that against an experienced secondary that now has confidence because it's already recorded a pick six, I mean, he was trying to force the ball in places he should not have forced it. Iowa's defense was reading him like a book. We talked about Indiana has Ty Freifogel and Peyton Hendershot. They have some good options in the passing attack, but they don't have a great 1-2 punch, I will say. I don't think they're as deep at wide receiver as a lot of people thought. So it was just kind of a snowball. And I think that I truly believe that the way that game went on and the way he played, it just felt to me like they were trying to get too much back on one drive or one possession or one play. And that's why I think you saw him continue to make mistakes. He finished the day, 14-31 with 3 picks and no touchdowns. I mean, he was forcing it so much that there was just no way he was going to have success at that point.
And here's the thing I've noticed about Michael Penix, and it's not just the Iowa game. It's over throughout his career at Indiana. And I don't know if this is more about the wide receivers or about how hard Michael Penix throws the ball, but it seems like he's just throwing rockets, even if the pass is right in front of him. 2 of those picks, if I remember, bounced off receivers' hands. Now, I know the first one, DJ Matthews, fell down right before he got up. So that was obviously, you don't expect your receiver to fall down. And I'm sure as Penix was already making the decision to throw to him, that was already in play, and he didn't have time to react to that. So that, I mean, maybe it wasn't Penix's fault, but it's still the beginning of the game, and it was a big momentum swing. The other one, he had a wide open field. He could have run. And obviously, the coaching staff doesn't want Michael Penix to be the mobile quarterback that he was before.
Right.
But he could have gotten a first down on that particular play. And instead of doing that at the last second, he's throwing at a receiver who's not even looking at the ball. And Riley Moss is goes for his second pick six. So,
yeah, I mean, he doesn't. And this game was a bad example because you'd have to go through and probably look and see. But he does. I mean, he fires that ball in there no matter if the guy's 2 inches in front of him or whether, he's 40 yards down the field. And I'm not saying he doesn't have a lot of touch, but that's one aspect of his game that he could probably improve on because he just doesn't put much touch on the ball. And so, yeah, I mean, there are some flaws, and I don't want to make this a Michael Penix bash session because I still think he's a very good quarterback. This is what we talked about, though. When everybody was talking about Michael Penix being injured and coming back from injury, this is where I was more focused on his mentality. What happens when he takes a hit? What happens when he throws that interception? What happens when he can't get into a rhythm and maybe they have a few 3-and-outs? And he did not he's a good quarterback, but he did not respond well to what happened in that situation. And I think that's some cause for concern because I think at a certain point there were other things that are going through his head. Maybe his knee starts to hurt a little bit. Like I said, he's trying to get everything back in one play. The crowd noise now becomes a bigger factor than maybe it was at the start of the game. There are just so many factors that play into that I think it was like the perfect storm. And it would be interesting to, and I'm not saying the outcome would be different, but it would be interesting to see. Let's say Indiana played Idaho week 1, and he makes some of these mistakes, and then but Indiana still wins a comfortable 38-10 game or something like that. I don't know, just throwing out a score.
Yeah.
So it would be interesting to see how he could bounce back from that and maybe better himself for the Iowa game if they would have swapped those two. But the schedule is what it is. You have to be at 110%, ready to go, prepared for what Iowa's going to bring. So to me, a little bit falls on, a lot of this falls on Michael Penix, but a lot of it too, in my opinion, falls on Nick Sheridan because you have to be better prepared for Iowa's defense. You have to know how good they are in the secondary. You've had 8 months to prepare for this game. You've had plenty of video footage from the last 2 seasons when Iowa's defense has been really, really good. So I would like to ask him, and maybe he's already talked about it, what was the strategy here when you were going in it, and why didn't you try to pick up 5 to 8 yards more times and instead of going 15, 20 yards down the field?
Yeah, well, I do know they had some issues on the offensive line. Luke Haggard wasn't in, who was supposed to be one of the starting linemen, and I think they had to shift some guys. So I'm sure that made some issues with committing to the run more so than they would have been. I don't know that for a fact. I'm not an offensive line or a run game coach, but that's something that I'm sure came into play at one point. But one thing you said a second ago too, the fact that they didn't start the season with a cupcake like Idaho.
Right.
There's so much overreaction that comes in these week 1 games that are bigger games.
Yep.
And obviously Iowa looks like a fantastic team, and they probably are. But Indiana also probably isn't as bad as they looked against Iowa either, I don't think.
No, I would agree with you there, and maybe we'll get into this later, but my cause for concern is the schedule that they have, especially in the weeks coming up, because Indiana's probably not as bad as they looked, but there's a very real possibility they're not as good as anybody thought that they were going to be.
And that's true too. I'm not taking any away from that stance at all.
Right. So that's my point. I don't think they're that bad, but my question is, are they as good as we thought? I thought that this would be a 9 or 10 win team. I thought 8 wins was a guarantee. I really don't feel that comfortable about that pick anymore because when you look at the schedule, especially on the front-loaded portion, and you still have to play a ranked Cincinnati team, a Michigan State team that demoralized and destroyed Northwestern on the road in week 1. You have Penn State, Ohio State, all before – I don't remember before. I think it's all before Halloween.
But here's the thing, though, now, Dustin. Even though Indiana would have loved to win this Iowa game, and obviously that was the goal.
Yeah.
Indiana is back where they're comfortable now. They're the underdog. All the belief in them on the outside is gone. The only people who probably believe in them are themselves. We've talked about how fragile the Indiana fan base is. There's several people, whether it's Twitter, in real life, whatever it may be, that think that this team's done. And they get to come home, tune up against Idaho before Cincinnati comes to town. It is a sold-out crowd. I don't know whether everybody will show up because Indiana has had sellouts before where not everybody shows up, especially after that Iowa performance. But I think from an internal standpoint, Indiana has an opportunity to reverse their fortunes very quickly. I don't know that they will, but the earmuffs and blinders, all that stuff they always say, if they're able to go back to the way they were last year, right now is the perfect time to do it because all that hype is gone. The national hype is gone. I'm not saying that they can still go 10-2, 11-1, but Indiana can right this ship quickly. This is the same personnel that they had going into Iowa. Mm-hmm. Obviously, it didn't turn out the way they wanted to in week 1, but nothing's changed. This team is the same as it was. You obviously have Devon Matthews who got injured, and I don't know how long he's going to be out. But for the most part, this is the same team that defied the odds last year. And again, it was 2020. It was a pandemic. There were no fans. Indiana had to play against a very hostile crowd in Penick Stadium this past week. But they get to play at home this week against a probably very sleepy crowd against Idaho. I hate to say that, but that's the way the Indiana fans are right now. And I don't know if that'll change unless something changes with this football season in a hurry. But so my take on this, Indiana internally right now has the opportunity to flip this script early on in the season after that loss.
They do. And I lean back a little bit, and I should just preface this for anybody watching. I am wearing an Iowa shirt. I do have all 14.
I didn't even notice that.
But I want to say that I showed such disrespect for Iowa that I feel bad for ever doubting Phil Parker. So I have to wear this Iowa shirt. I do have all 14. Basically that's all I wear every day. So I apologize to any people that think I'm an Iowa homer now. It's just a very comfortable shirt as we get into the start of September. And also, like I said, the disrespect I showed in not picking Iowa to win that game, I'll show them some love today. But I think you're right. What's going to be interesting to me is to see how they kind of come out in this Idaho game. I think it's very important. I don't know that you don't have to play your best football to beat Idaho. I don't know much about them.
Well, interesting. Well, just to interrupt you, do you know what they did this past week, Idaho?
No, I don't.
They played I think it's a Division II team from Canada. So actually, I don't know if that's Division II, but there's a team called Simon Fraser, and they beat them 68-0.
So this is some sort of club team, I assume. If it's from Canada, they're not an NCAA team.
That's what I heard from Don Fisher this morning when he was talking with Jim on the show. But I know Idaho's an FCS school, so I guess they have some different rules. I guess that game's allowed to count towards their record. But supposedly this team is from Canada, and they're the equivalent of a Division II here in the U.S.
Well, that would make sense. I mean, they do have one of the best named stadiums in college football, the Kibby Dome. I think it's still the Kibby Dome. Yeah, I don't know.
It is, yeah. I was showing Jim a picture of it earlier today because I don't think he had seen it before. It reminded us of a miniature Lucas Oil Stadium.
Very miniature. I don't even know. That can't hold more than like 10,000 people. Yeah, exactly.
Micro.
So it's going to be interesting to me to see how Indiana comes out of that game, because I think it's important from a mental standpoint to kind of go out and set the tone. And even though you don't have to play great to beat Idaho 38-10, it's important for you to get off to a hot start, get some momentum rolling, try to end that one early. Try to build a 3 or 4 touchdown lead at halftime, and then just kind of cruise. And then I think you have a little different mindset heading into that Cincinnati game. If you don't play well, like it doesn't matter. If Indiana, let's just say Indiana wins that game 35-24, right? 2-possession game.
Gosh, you're talking about Cincinnati or Idaho?
Against Idaho. So
that can't happen. I'm not saying it will happen or it can't, like physically can't, but in terms of who you are and who you're supposed to be, 35-24 can happen.
Right. So this is my point. Like, you feel good. I mean, you don't feel good, but you're happy because you won. But players know when they play well and when they don't play well. Coaches know when they play well and they don't play well. If they don't play well and they win that game, not even by a sizable margin, like I think that could have such an effect that you go and you play your first 2 games and you play terribly, that you could.
It's like the Penn State effect. It's the Penn State effect from last year. It can derail your entire season.
Yes, that's a great comparison, because that's exactly what I'm thinking. You could, if you know you're not playing well, that's going to creep into your mind. If you go out and you blast Idaho and you beat them by 45 points, then you're like, okay, this is how we're supposed to play. Then you carry some of that momentum into the Cincinnati game. Like I said, if you don't play well, even if it's a 2 or 3 possession win for you and it was convincing the whole way and you don't play well, it makes me wonder how they're going to come out against I assume what will be a top 10 Cincinnati team.
Yeah, and I think Tom Allen, he's been known even before Indiana rose to the prominence that they did overnight last year. Tom Allen probably expects to hold this team to 7 or less points. I don't care if they put up 68 on Simon Fraser from Canada or whatever that is. Indiana, that mindset should be you hold them to a touchdown or less. And I think they absolutely can. Will they? A lot of that has to do with what you're talking about. Do they think they can? Is that belief still in them from last year? Hopefully Iowa didn't drain it out, because it's kind of like we just talked about with the Penn State thing. I don't know that this is the exact same effect, but the fact that last year Penn State had to play Indiana followed by Ohio State, and the way that they lost to Indiana going into that game had to have a massive effect on what happened the rest of that season. There's no way to doubt that, I feel like.
Right. And I don't even know that you have to. The defense, the goal is always to hold the opponent to as little points as possible, right? That goes without saying. But I don't even necessarily think you have to hold them to a certain point total. I just think it has to look.
And that's true. You're right.
Much better. And that's why
this wouldn't be a positive necessarily, but they could score points off turnovers, and yet you hold them to 50 yards defensively or something like that. Hopefully Penick doesn't throw any interceptions. Hopefully there's not a scoop and score, but that would offset the score aspect of it, kind of thing.
Right. Well, and I think to me, this game's way more important for the offense than it is for the defense, because
Absolutely.
Again, like I said, let's just say that you take away those 2 pick sixes, and nothing else changes in that game. It's a 20-6 game. So you lose by 2 touchdowns. It still wasn't pretty, but I think you feel at least a little bit better because you gave up 20. Maybe then you can, okay, that Iowa defense is really good. Okay, that, our still played pretty well. We gave up 1 big play. And then, we held them to a couple field goals. They had 1 really good drive, but the defense played pretty well. I think just because of the way it looks, like aesthetically and cosmetically, the way that game played out, it just looked so ugly on the defensive standpoint, because you look at the final score and it's 34-6, and you're like, boy, the defense didn't play well at all. They had some lapses. There's no doubt about it. They had things that can't happen, but when you look at the overall picture, it was the offense that was the big problem. So to me, this game is more important. Penix can't, it's not that he can't throw an interception, but I feel like he can't throw an interception. You can't have these bad turnovers. Yeah. Ball security has to be key. Trying to figure out something in the run game. Again, you should be able to run all over these guys. Penix should have no problem. He should throw 15 to 20 passes max in this game, in my opinion, because your offensive line should be so much better than their defensive line that Stephen Carr is able to rush for 150 to 200 yards. And maybe you divvy up the carries. So to me, this is a tone setter for the offense. I don't care so much about the defense and the point total. I think if you get off to a good start, you have to have a strong first quarter. Your offense has to play flawless. And I think the defense will take care of itself because, like I said 3 times, I think the defense played a pretty sound game. It's just that it doesn't look that way in the stat column, and it doesn't look that way because you got beat 34-6.
Before we get it, I'm going to go ahead and get into some fan questions here in a second. We got 3 of them, so thanks to everybody who sent in fan questions this week. First time doing that. I have one more question for Dustin, though, about Iowa specifically. And after watching that Penn State-Wisconsin game, do you think that Iowa will run the table in the Big Ten West? You don't have to give me a lengthy answer, but if you have any sort of just off-the-cuff thoughts on it, I'm just curious.
Well, I think that Iowa right now is the favorite to win the Big Ten West after seeing what we saw. Now, that might be considered an overreaction, one of those week 1 overreactions, because that's what we tend to do. But I look at Graham Mertz in Wisconsin, and he had the same issues basically that team had the same trouble Indiana had against Penn State. Now, I think Penn State's defense is really good, so we'll find out a little bit more about Wisconsin. But inside the red zone, they couldn't convert. Graham Mertz threw 2 late interceptions. There were all kinds of issues with center and quarterback and running back exchanges throughout the course of that game. I looked at Wisconsin's defense is still going to be one of the best in the Big Ten. They were without Leo Chenal, one of their top linebackers, and they still held Penn State to 16 points. And it was a shutout in the first half. I don't think Wisconsin has the offense. Right now, I'm taking Spencer Petras over Graham Mertz. And it's not even close because he's so much more consistent. Like Brian Ferentz seems to me to be able to know how to use Spencer Petras so much better right now than Paul Chryst or Joe Rudolph know how to use Graham Mertz. Now, like I said, maybe that's because Penn State's defense is the best in the Big Ten. They're obviously really good. We'll find out more as the season goes along. But right now, I trust Iowa's quarterback, running back, tight end more than I trust the guys at Wisconsin. I don't think Iowa can run the table because when you're going up against these teams they have to play Penn State. They have to play Wisconsin. They have to play Minnesota. They'll still have to play Purdue for whatever reason they've had trouble beating Purdue. Like, I just think I don't think that there's a team in the Big Ten West that's so far and ahead of everybody else that it's possible that they run the table. But I do think that they're the favorite now to win the division.
Well, that's interesting. And then one thing, when you were talking about Spencer Petras, it made me think about Peyton Ramsey. He's not an all-star type quarterback, but he's so, at least in this past game, he was so calm, cool, and collected that he just seemed like he was that perfect game manager for somebody like Iowa. So I'll leave it at that. I'll go and get into our 3 fan questions. Excuse me. Some of this we've already covered, but I guess we can go a little more in depth with it. So we'll go and read the first one. The first one's from Keegan Cundiff out of Bowling Green. At least I think he's in Bowling Green. He's a friend of mine who went to WKU, and he sends in, do you guys think Indiana's loss was just a bad game, or is this what to expect for the season? And we like I said, we've kind of touched on this, and I think a lot of it comes down to how, like I said, we've talked about this. A lot of it comes down to how they respond in this Idaho game. If they're able to block out all those thoughts and all the hate they've been getting and negative press from how they played in this Iowa game, if they can come out, beat Idaho the way that they're supposed to beat Idaho and not make this some sort of scary close game against an FCS opponent, I think it's possible that Indiana has a chance to right the ship, especially with the following week. You have another big opponent coming to Bloomington, Cincinnati, and that's that perfect opportunity following Idaho to show people, hey, that Iowa game was a fluke. We are for real, and we're here to try to win the Big Ten East.
Yeah, it's so hard to judge after week one. I mean, let's go back to 2020. This is the best example I have, really, is remember Mississippi State beat LSU in the first game of the season, the reigning national champions. And Mississippi State, for lack of a better term, was garbage the rest of the year. I mean, that's just the fact.
And LSU was garbage the rest of the year.
Well, and LSU turned out to be garbage too, yeah. So it's so hard to tell. I think Indiana can still win 8 games. I think that's still within the realm of possibility. I'm kind of backing off that 9-win total unless they get to a bowl game because I think the schedule's awfully difficult. But let's take a step back again. People want to, because of this college football playoff era, everybody wants to be like, our team's got to go 10-2 or 11-1 or undefeated to have a good season. We're talking about Indiana. We're talking about the losingest program in college football history. I bring that up because expectations.
How is Kansas not past that, by the way?
Great question.
Go ahead. Sorry to interrupt.
You're fine. Don't put these unreal. I don't want to call them unrealistic expectations because I was in that group too. But don't let what happened on Saturday temper your excitement for this team because you're talking about a program that could go to a 3rd straight bowl game for the first time in 35 years, something like that, since Bill Mallory was the head coach. So I think Indiana can still be good. I don't think they're going to be quite as good as we had expected. And I don't know that that's an Indiana problem. I think it's a combination of Indiana maybe missing some of those key departures last year. And then I think, again, you look at the schedule. Michigan State looked awfully good. Penn State looked awfully good. Ohio State looked good.
Michigan State, I'm not saying it is an overreaction, but Northwestern may be complete garbage, like we were saying. We don't really know. That's the thing about these first week conference games. Yeah. It's so hard to tell because normally in a regular season, and this is the norm from now on, actually, I feel like. I know there's a lot of seasons in the future where they're having week 1 conference games. But the way it used to be, you play your 2 or 3 non-conference opponents, and you'd get a good idea of who has a good offense, who has a good defense. Right now, you're already getting into the meat of things, and you don't really know what you have. You don't get to have any exhibition games. You get to have internal scrimmages. But what does that do for you? Go ahead.
I was going to say I'm going to disagree with you slightly there because we can go back to 2019, I think it was. I think that was Mike Loxley's first year at Maryland. And they beat Howard. They scored like 70 points in that game and scored 68 or something. 50 or 60.
This is a great example. I like this. Go ahead.
Everybody thought that Maryland was going to be, they were going to be a top, maybe not a top contender to Ohio State, but they thought that they were going to be a top 25 team. And they went 3-9 or 4-8. I think 3-9, maybe 4-8. They didn't make a bowl. They weren't close to a bowl. They got blown out in most of their games. That's the point I'm trying to make. So it's just, you're right. It's so hard to tell from the first week, even the first 2 weeks. But my point is, man, with Kenneth Walker at Michigan State, when he rushes for over 250 yards against a defense that's typically pretty good against the run, to me, that's a big deal. That's why I say I think Michigan State, I'm not saying that they're going to be number one in the Big Ten. I'm just saying at the beginning of the year, I would have counted that as a guaranteed win for Indiana. Now I'm looking at it like, maybe not. Maybe that's not a guarantee.
Why do we go through the schedule every year? And I feel like, and obviously this is the first time doing this podcast, but in my head I do this. We go through the schedule. We try to circle teams. Oh, this is an automatic win. Why do we do that? There's no such thing as an automatic win in football, basketball, any of that. In March Madness doesn't matter. The 16 seed has won once, right? Not twice, but just once.
Yep.
There's no such thing as a gimme in any sport. So why do we do that?
Because we're gluttons for punishment. We try to predict and see into the future. And then, do you know what's funny to me, though, is so we always do this crystal ball series on Saturday Tradition before the start of every college football season, and we predict every team's loss. And the blowback we get, let's just say we predict, I don't know how it all played out this year because I'd have to go back and look. But let's just say we predicted I don't even know. Let's say I'm going to use Purdue and Ohio State as an example because that's this one. So let's say we predicted Purdue to beat Ohio State, and it's like, well, what? There's no way Purdue could beat Ohio State. And I'm like, well, if we would have said the same thing in 2018, you would have given me the exact same reason. The point is not that Purdue is better than Ohio State. The point is upsets happen in college football, and if you have a certain matchup that works in a team's favor, or if there's some level of uncertainty there, then that's what makes the sport so great. So it is very difficult to predict. And that's why it's kind of fun to look at the ESPN, the FPI, the football playoff, or the football power index, and try to gauge, because it gives you a percentage. And I don't know how they use that. I don't know how that formula works, but it's almost like, okay, we have a 75% chance to win. It's almost like a more realistic expectation, right? Okay. Because you're like looking at that Michigan State game and like, instead of a guaranteed win, we should win that game. It's 65% in our favor, but there's a 35% chance we don't win. So I kind of, ever since they came out with that, even though I don't like the FPI rankings and how they do that stuff, I do find that when they formulate those matchups, it gives you kind of a more realistic expectation of what should be a gimme and what is going to be considered a sure victory.
Yeah, that's an interesting way to think of it, I guess, but we'll keep on pushing and making our predictions and being wrong. I mean, just to go ahead and foreshadow, I mean, right now, and we'll get into pick'ems later, Dustin's 7-4, I'm 6-5. I mean, that's not a very hot start.
You're above 500. That's all that matters.
Yeah, we're bowl eligible.
Perfect, yeah.
So we've got two more questions. This one we actually haven't touched on, I don't think. This is from Dave Cattell. He sent this in on Twitter. He says, why not change horses when the starter has gone lame? How many mistakes are okay before they aren't? And he's referring to why was Michael Penick still in for as long as he was. And I was wrestling with this for a while. Jennifer Land, who watches or listens and watches Indiana Sports Beat, was twittering back and forth with me whenever Penix threw his second pick and saying, time to put Tuttle in. And I was like, I just don't think that's a smart decision, because you don't want to screw up the mentality of your starting quarterback when he's supposed to be as elite as he is. And then he goes and throws his third pick, and all of a sudden my mind's changed. But at that point, you've only got a couple minutes left until halftime, and I was like, well, here's what I would do. And this was what I assume Indiana ended up doing anyway. Because you're going into halftime, keep Penix out there, have him come back and start off the beginning of the second half and see what happens. If you need to make adjustments and put Tuttle in after that, go ahead. I don't think there was necessarily any reason to take out Penick for those last couple of drives in the first half, because at that point it throws off Michael Penick. He may have already expected it, and maybe it helped his mentality enough that it didn't affect him anymore that he wasn't taken out. And so it's a tough game to play. It's not a question that you would have expected to have to answer when even you, Dustin, I believe, I don't know if it was your article, but it was somewhere on Saturday Tradition, you picked Penick as the top quarterback in the Big Ten.
Yeah, I do my quarterback rankings, and I'll have more of those after week 2. He will probably not be at the top of the list now.
And no, actually, hold your thought. I hate to do this, but you know what? We'll talk about this later if we have time. So just go ahead and go with your thought about the quarterback.
Yeah, so this is why I get paid to write and not coach, because I think that there's a delicate balance that if I'm Tom Allen or if I'm Nick Sheridan, I think that there's a situation where you have to weigh, okay, do I take my starter out? Because this is what goes through my mind when I think about a guy who's going through some struggles. Do I bring in Jack Tuttle for a series, for one drive, and talk with Michael Penick and say, settle down, we can't get it all back on one play, get him to regroup? I'm not taking him out for the game. I'm taking him out for a drive. Yeah. And settling him down, saying we can't get it all back. You're going to go out the next drive. We're going to get, this is our game plan. Let's just take this drive, relax a little bit, and catch your breath, because we're not going to get it all. We're not going to overcome a 21-point depth. What was it? Was it 31 to?
So at halftime, I believe it was.
I think it was 31-3.
Oh no, you're right. I
think they only scored 3 points in the second half. But at some point in that first half, I would have said, we're gonna, he's gonna go in for a drive. We're gonna have you come back out the next. We need you to be tip top. Take a breath. Let's get this thing back on track. On the other side of that, this is where it comes into knowing your players. Is taking Michael Penick out for the season, does that take a shot to his confidence? Because you got to remember, you still have 11 games left on this schedule. And if you want to get to bowl eligibility, you pretty much have to have Michael Penick playing at a high level. So there's a delicate balance there. I don't have the right answer, but I'm guessing that that's kind of the conversation that was being had. Do we pull him out? Do we give him a breather and have him calm down a little bit? Or do we try to have him play through the struggles? Because at some point this season, he's got to play a Penn State defense. He's got to play an Ohio State defense. He's got to play a lot of good defenses. He has to work through this, because it's going to come up a lot. So maybe there's that kind of situation going on too. I think it's a no-win situation, to be honest with you. I don't think Jack Tuttle coming in would have really solved anything. I understand why fans might have wanted to see that, but at this point, game 1, I'm not so sure that makes a huge difference in the outcome of this game.
I know there's no way this would have happened, but in my mind, I was like, throw Donovan McCulley out there. I don't really care what Jack Tuttle did a lot for Indiana last season. But in my opinion, based off the little that we know of Donovan McCulley, he's the future at quarterback for Indiana. I just would have wanted to see, can he throw the ball? What's he going to do? You don't burn your red shirt by putting him out there. So that's just what I would have liked to see. I know that wasn't what was going to happen, but one more question, and we have touched on this, but this kind of goes into detail what we were talking about. Also from Twitter, Christine Papazian, I believe she is from she's from the U.S., but she also had another flag in her Twitter account, but I can't remember where it was. But she asks, what do you think of the defensive performance? Other than the big bust at the beginning of the game, I thought they played well, certainly well enough to win or at least compete if the offense provided even a smidge of production. And on the surface, the numbers back that up. And I think, Dustin, you actually talked about this earlier. If you eliminate Penix's mistakes, his turnovers, because they got 20 points off turnovers, that leaves them with 16 points, I believe. Is that what we came to? I can't think of what the final score was. It was 20 points would have been 16.
7, was it 16?
Yeah, it was 36-3. Or 30. My goodness. Sorry, Christine. We are forgetting the final score. But either way, the point is.
Yeah, it was 34-6, but I can't do math, so I'm just going to take your word for it.
So actually, it would have been 14-3. So it makes sense. It's like Dustin was saying earlier. Dustin was saying you're probably feeling a little bit better about the loss because at that point the issue is offense still. But excuse me, I've got a cough coming up.
I think to the point, like the defense played well. It played well enough to win that game. The problem is it didn't. I mean, the problem is the offense. I don't know how else to say that other than if you hold Iowa, let's take the turnovers off the field goals. If you hold Iowa to 20 points, you suspect that you're going to at least have a shot to win. Maybe you don't win the game, but if you hold Iowa to 20 points, you think that you have a chance to win that game. And they really had no shot, and it's because of the 2 offensive mistakes. So, yeah, I put the onus on the offense because they didn't play well. The mistakes proved to be too costly. And outside of that Tyler Goodson run and that one long drive they had with Spencer Petras,
when he ran into the end zone,
I mean, they played really well, but your defense can't play every game like it's a shutout. I mean, they're going to surrender touchdowns. They're going to give up field goals. So, yeah, I think that the defense played well enough to win. If they play like that, they're going to win a lot of Big Ten games. You just have to have the offense produce something.
Yep, and we're going to get our first taste since this Saturday against Idaho. I know it's not the sexy matchup as it was this past weekend, but I think it's exactly what the doctor ordered for the Hoosiers this week, a little tune-up. And we'll have to see. Make sure we're not wrapping the show up, but be sure to listen to Indiana Sports Beat to hear more of that throughout the week as we prepare for Indiana's next game and first home game. And we'll see how the fan turnout is for that. I am not overtly optimistic, but hopefully I'm proven wrong on that. So with that, let's go ahead and get into we're going to combine pick'ems and previewing the rest of the Big Ten slate. Like I said earlier, Dustin holds a 1-game lead over me right now, 7-4 to my 6-5. The difference there being the Nebraska-Illinois game, because last week Dustin and I coincidentally chose everything the exact same. And once again, I'm going to try to do this every week. I've gone ahead and made my picks in advance, so I'm not influenced to make any sort of different decision. But I do think that we're going to have a couple differences in here, potentially. But we'll just go ahead and go through this. I made our game of the week Iowa at Iowa State. So even though I normally go through the schedule-wise on when they happen, I put Iowa State down at the bottom. So we'll do that one last. And I know we can't do the shirt reveal for Dustin. And I'm not saying he chose Iowa, but he doesn't have an Iowa State shirt. So you wouldn't be able to know who he chose because he only has Big Ten team shirt. So with that, going into our first game of week 2, we have Illinois at Virginia. The Bielema honeymoon comes to a quick halt after they lose to Conference USA opponent UTSA this past weekend. Dustin, I'll go ahead and start with you. Who are you picking in that game?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I think the loss of C.J. Hart and maybe Keith Randolph. We don't know the status of Brandon Peters. I think that's going to be a close game, but I'm going to favor Virginia in that one.
I took Virginia as well in that one. Going into our first ranked opponent of the 2, the only other one being Iowa State, we have number 12 Oregon at number 3 Ohio State. And originally, before this past week, I thought this could be a pretty good game, and it still can be. And I'm not saying that it can't. But Oregon State came awfully close to losing to Kalen DeBoer's Fresno State Bulldogs this past week. And because of that, I'm taking the Ohio State Buckeyes.
Yeah, I mean, and Kayvon Thibodeau left with an injury. It's a 9 o'clock Pacific time kickoff for Oregon. I think that the body clock, that's going to make a huge difference. I think Ohio State's going to win that one without much difficulty.
Yeah, I'm sure that's going to be a popular pick. I'm not sure what Reese Davis is thinking still. I do remember a couple weeks ago he said something about Oregon. I'm not sure if his mind has changed on that. But, man, my throat's starting to be a little scratchy for some reason.
I'm wearing off on you.
Next up, we got these next 3 might be pretty quick ones. So if we need to go through them quickly, we will. Youngstown State at Michigan State. Who you taking, Dustin?
Michigan State. After that performance they had in Evanston, Spartans going to get it done.
Yeah, I'm also taking the Spartans. Next, we got Miami of Ohio at Minnesota. Is Mohamed Ibrahim out for the year?
Yes.
Man.
Yep.
And he looked so promising in the first – I can't remember when he got injured, but just when he played.
I think it was fantastic. I think it was the third quarter maybe or early – it was late third, maybe early fourth, something along there. I still like Minnesota. I still think they have a good football team. They're not as good without him on the field, but I'll take the Golden Gophers.
So will I. What was his injury? Because I didn't actually see what it was said that it was.
I believe it was Achilles. I don't know for sure, but I usually stick with lower leg or leg injury.
Next, we've got the Indiana State Fighting Trees, the Sycamores at Northwestern. Northwestern prone to losing to FCS teams when they have down seasons. I'm not thinking this is one of those. I'm still going with the Wildcats.
Yeah, I don't. I'm going to go with the Wildcats too. They didn't look great, but she should be able to beat Indiana State without much trouble.
Absolutely. And next one, this is the first, not the first one, but one of the first ones that I had issues going with. Rutgers at Syracuse. The Rutgers put up 61 points on Temple, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, 61-14. 61-14. They forced 5 turnovers in that game.
Yeah, so Rutgers, once again, feeling the Shiano movement. I don't know if they have a hashtag or anything out there in Piscataway, but
Chop.
It's Chop.
Shiano's bringing it back.
Does that follow or fall under the cliche season moniker?
He kind of coined that.
Okay.
During his first time at Rutgers. So it was, keep chop. I mean, at first it was keep chopping. I don't know if now because of social media, it wasn't
Ramsey. It might have him come out and do a little something for him.
There you go.
Sounds like a cooking slogan.
Well, it works. So
who are you going with?
I'm going to go with Rutgers.
I'm taking Rutgers as well. So far, we're dead on. I'm hoping I know we're going to have a different. Well, actually, I don't want to say I know because I could be wrong, but I do think we have a couple differences coming up. Next, Ball State at number 11, Penn State. I'll have you go first, Dustin.
Yeah, I'm going to go Penn State on that one. Now, here's the thing. Let me preface this. I do think there's going to be a little bit of a hangover effect for Penn State. I think that Ball State's a pretty good team out of the MAC. And so I think
they're favored to win, or they won it last year, one or the other.
Coming off of a big win against Wisconsin in Madison, I think that they're going to and they have a game against Auburn next week, I believe, in week 3. I think they're going to be a little bit looking ahead. But I think that through the first 15 minutes, I think that people will be like, look at Ball State and Penn State. And then the next 45 minutes, it's going to be all Nittany Lions.
I will take the I don't know if I said mine already or not, but I'm taking Penn State as well in that one. The next one, I think I might regret picking potentially. But we have Buffalo at Nebraska. And I think based on my reaction, you probably know where I'm going with this. Buffalo put up 69 points on Wagner this past week. And I know Nebraska put up tons of yardage on their FCS opponent Fordham. But I just think this is going to be another letdown. I'm going with Buffalo with the upset at Nebraska to put yet another gash in the Scott Frost era.
Yeah, I can certainly understand why people would pick Buffalo. And I don't think it's unwarranted because we've seen a lot of inconsistency out of Nebraska. I just think that Nebraska has too much now. I think it will be a good game. I do think that, but I think Nebraska has too much talent for a team like Buffalo. If Lance Leipold was still there, I might have a different thought.
Is it really that much of a difference though? 1 year removed.
I mean, you're still talking about different schemes, new staff, that kind of stuff. So to me, that's a big deal. But I think it's going to be close. We'll see. I'm going to go with Nebraska on that.
So far, the only 2 differences between you and I, games involving Nebraska. Interesting. Next up, Eastern Michigan at number 18, Wisconsin. Dustin, who you got on that one?
I'm going to go with Wisconsin, and they might shut out Eastern Michigan.
Yeah, it seems like the directional Michigans have always just been pushovers for the Big Ten. I don't know. I'm sure I know Western Michigan had a decent year when PJ Fleck was there.
Well, Eastern Michigan has beaten a Big Ten team in 3 straight seasons, not counting.
Who do I know then? Or what do I know then?
I think they've beaten, I don't remember the order, but it's Rutgers, Purdue, and Illinois. So not a team like Wisconsin, but with Chris Creighton there, they're the Fighting Emus. They can be pretty tough.
The Fighting Emus. I like that. I don't think I've heard that before. I'm taking Wisconsin as well. Next up, we got 4 more games. Idaho at Indiana. I'm taking Indiana to win this one, bounce back, and I'm sticking with what I said earlier. I'm thinking Indiana wins this 49-3. And that may be bold considering how bad their offense looked this past week, but I really think that with the tide turning on the expectations, if Tom Allen is as good of a coach as he says he is in terms of getting his team to rally around what he believes in, I think they'll come out ready and win 49-3. That's what I'm predicting.
Do I need a final score prediction?
You can give me one if you want. I just wanted to give one because obviously you think Indiana's going to beat Idaho, so I wanted to be clear on how they would beat Idaho.
I think, I mean, obviously I think they're going to win. I would go somewhere in the neighborhood of 42-10. And
I think that should still be acceptable on certain occasions, as long as they don't give a bunch of yardage in the process. But and look good on offense. Looking good on offense is the key this week. I keep going to the defensive side of things, but they can't win. I think even if they shut out Idaho and won like 17-0, that would be a disappointment.
Yeah. Correct. Yes, I would agree with that.
So moving on, we got 3 more. We got Howard at Maryland. Maryland, a team that both of us went against last week with West Virginia. You can go on first on this one.
I'm gonna go Maryland on this. I can't imagine losing to an FCS school after they played really well against West Virginia.
I'm taking Maryland as well. 2 more. We got Washington and Michigan. No longer it's a marquee matchup, but it's no longer the ranked Washington. Did they lose to FCS Montana, if I'm not mistaken, this past week?
Correct, they did.
The Pac-12 had a pretty ugly week, if I remember correctly. I don't remember all the scores, but I know there was a lot of disappointments out there.
Yeah, Pac-12 North particularly. The Pac-12 South, I think, was okay, but I mean,
UCLA was an exception.
Yeah, UCLA. They look really good, but now I've already lost what? Oh, Michigan, Washington. I forgot what we were talking about. I liked what I saw to Blake Corum. I liked what I saw to Donovan Edwards, Hassan Haskins, Cade McNamara. I really like Michigan, even though they lost Ronnie Bell for the season, probably their best wide receiver. I think that they have a lot more weapons than I gave them credit for. I think that Michigan wins, and I don't think it's close. I think Michigan's going to get a blowout victory over Washington, and then we're going to start talking about maybe this is the year for Jim Harbaugh. I don't think that's the case, but I think that we're going to start to talk about it.
Yeah, I'm taking Michigan as well. And didn't we see a flash of J.J. McCarthy? I know I saw a play. Yes, I don't know how long he played, but he had a pretty sweet touchdown pass, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, that was the talk of the day. Even though Cade McNamara played really consistent, really well for him, J.J. McCarthy to avoid a sack, run to the other side of the field. I don't remember who the touchdown pass was to, but to fling a perfect pass across his body the long way of the field, that kid's going to be special.
So there you go. Michigan, once again, kind of the hype that's going away from Indiana kind of flooding onto Michigan. I know they're not related, but it's kind of a reverse effect there. And then finally, our game of the week, I think it's College Game Day too. Number 10, Iowa at number 9, Iowa State. Fun fact that I feel like a lot of people, casual fans who aren't fans of Iowa or Iowa State, don't know. Iowa State, I think, has dropped 4 straight in this series. They didn't play last year because they were only playing conference opponents. At least the Big Ten was. Is it 5 straight?
I think it's 5 straight. I think it's 5 straight, and 6 of the last 7 have gone to Iowa, if I'm not mistaken.
And I saw you quoted a tweet on Twitter today of the fact that game day is going there. It's a distraction for Iowa State, so Iowa can just stay focused on the task at hand.
Well, Tyler Goodson, the running back for Iowa, made the comment that this is basically Iowa State's Super Bowl, and there's a distraction. And I was excited because, I love, a lot of fans are probably going to look at that and be like, keep your mouth shut. Let's just go play football. But, man, I love when they throw shade. I love when there's trolling going on. I love that passion. I like this game. I'm not impressed with Iowa State. They couldn't run the ball against Northern Iowa. Their offensive line didn't look great. And what we saw from Iowa last week, I think Iowa wins this one, and they might creep. If they get a win, and if they win by a significant margin, we might be talking about an Iowa team that's knocking on the door of a top 5 ranking.
And immediately people will start talking about Ohio State versus Iowa in the Big Ten Championship. The winner could go to the college football playoff, or maybe even potentially 2 Big Ten teams in the playoff. We know how they like to talk that SEC talk with 2 Big Ten teams in the playoff. If Iowa and Ohio State, obviously it starts with beating Iowa State with this weekend.
Right.
But this could be the first time that we have a talk of 2 12-0 teams going at each other in the Big Ten Championship.
Yeah, that would be a lot of fun too. I mean, that would be – we could see that. I don't know. Iowa's schedule is so tough.
And like I said, we mentioned this during the recap earlier, but we don't really know for sure whether Iowa could run the table. We know that they could, but we don't know if they will.
And like I said, they've had trouble in the past against Wisconsin. I know they beat them last year, but before that, they had lost 4 or 5 straight, I think. They, for whatever reason, Kirk Ferentz is 1-3 against Jeff Brom, and I think Iowa's had the better team at least 3 out of those 4 years. So it makes no sense. So it's why college football is crazy. But Iowa looks really good, and I do expect them to win this week.
And so do I. And a lot of that, I mean, they made it easy on me because Iowa looked fantastic against Indiana. Iowa State looked less than impressive against an FCS opponent. Right. And I believe they've had issues with Northern Iowa. Did they lose to Northern Iowa last year? Or was it a different team that was?
They lost to Louisiana in the season opener last year.
Okay. But Louisiana ended up being pretty good. So that's not the exact same thing. But there you go. Once again, Dustin and I almost identical on our picks. So I have the opportunity if Buffalo gets the victory to tie in our record. So, but I guess that's going to wrap it up for us this week. Be sure to listen to Indiana Sports Beat once again Monday through Friday. Dustin's with us on Thursdays for all things Indiana sports, not just football, but all things Indiana. We also got Pacers and Colts, all that good stuff, and then we'll be back again next week on Monday. I know it's Tuesday today. Yesterday was Labor Day, so all that stuff was good. We'll be back soon. Thanks again, Dustin. Enjoy having you on here every week for one.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun, and we'll do it again next week, previewing week 3 and recapping week 2.
Yep, and hopefully we'll have something to anticipate with this Indiana-Cincinnati matchup coming up. But they got to get through the Vandals first. We'll see you next week. Thanks for listening. This has been This Week in Indiana Football.